Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U.S. horizon, watching the stars drift past the main viewport. His ship had been traveling through the Outer Rim territories for 6 weeks now, mapping new star systems and collecting data for the HFY Galactic Council's Exploration Division. The work was routine but important, and Jake took pride in following the careful diplomatic protocols that had kept humanity in good standing with the Council for nearly 200 years. Dr. Lisa Park looked up from her science station with a puzzled expression on her face. She had been monitoring long-range sensors when something unusual appeared on her screen. The readings showed what appeared to be a distress signal coming from a system 3 light-years away. Jake walked over to examine the data himself, noting the familiar pattern of human emergency codes mixed in with the static. "Amy, can you clean up this signal?" Jake asked his communications officer. Amy Walsh had been working with alien communication systems for over a decade and could decode almost anything the galaxy threw at her. She ran the signal through several filters before turning to face her captain with concern written across her features. "Sir, it's definitely human," Amy reported. "The signature matches the colony ship Serenity's Hope. They launched from Earth about 8 months ago, heading for the Kepler system to establish a new settlement." She paused to check her records again. According to the manifest, they're carrying about 1,500 colonists, including families with children. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Human colonies in the Outer Rim were supposed to be protected under Galactic Council law, but the vast distances between systems made enforcement difficult. He had heard rumors of attacks on remote settlements, but the Council always assured Earth that these were isolated incidents handled through proper diplomatic channels. "Tony, plot a course for the Kepler system," Jake ordered his security chief. Tony Rodriguez had served in Earth's defense forces before joining the exploration service, and Jake trusted his judgment completely. "Maximum speed, but maintain our diplomatic transponder codes. We don't want to alarm anyone." The horizon jumped to faster-than-light travel, and the journey to Kepler took 18 hours. As they approached the system, Amy began picking up more signals, including what sounded like weapons fire and desperate calls for help. The main colony world appeared on their screens, and Jake could see several large ships in orbit that definitely were not human in design. "Those are Vorthic vessels," Tony said grimly as he studied the tactical display. 3 heavy cruisers, and at least a dozen smaller attack ships. The colonists don't stand a chance against that kind of firepower. The Vorthic Empire was known throughout the galaxy as a militaristic species that believed in expanding their territory through conquest rather than diplomacy. Jake knew he had to be careful. The Galactic Council had very strict rules about how member species could interact with each other, especially during conflicts. Humans were expected to use diplomatic solutions and avoid any actions that might be seen as aggressive or threatening. Earth had built its reputation on being reasonable and peaceful, never starting fights or using excessive force. "Amy, open a channel to the lead Vorthic ship," Jake commanded. "We'll try to resolve this through proper diplomatic channels first." He straightened his uniform and prepared to deliver the careful words that human diplomats had been using for 2 centuries when dealing with hostile alien species. The main screen flickered to life, showing a Vorthic commander with the typical scaled skin and predatory features of his species. Commander Zextho looked at Jake with obvious contempt, his yellow eyes showing the kind of dismissive attitude that many aliens had toward humans. The Vorthic had always viewed humans as weak creatures who hid behind Council laws instead of fighting for what they wanted. "I am Captain Morrison of the human exploration vessel Horizon." Jake began using the formal diplomatic protocols. "We have detected what appears to be an unauthorized attack on a human colony world. Under Galactic Council Resolution 2847, all member species are required to respect the territorial claims of other council members and resolve disputes through peaceful negotiation. Zexthil made a sound that might have been laughter. Soft mammals. And their pathetic laws, he replied in accented but clear human language. Your species has no business claiming worlds in Vorthic space. These colonists are trespassing on territory that belongs to the Empire by right of conquest. His tone carried the arrogance of a predator who had never faced serious opposition. The Kepler system was officially registered to humanity through the Council's Colonization Bureau. Jake responded, keeping his voice calm and diplomatic. The proper paperwork was filed and approved 18 months ago. Your empire had the opportunity to file competing claims during the standard review period, but chose not to do so. The Vorthic commander's expression grew more hostile. Council paperwork means nothing to those with the strength to take what they desire. Your colonists have 3 choices: become slaves of the Empire, leave the system immediately, or die. Where they stand. The Vorthic do not negotiate with prey animals. Jake felt anger building inside him, but forced himself to maintain the diplomatic facade that Earth expected from its representatives. Commander Zexthil, I must formally protest this violation of Council law and request that you withdraw your forces immediately. I am prepared to contact the Council Mediation Service to resolve this dispute through proper channels. Contact whoever you wish, human, Zexthil replied with obvious amusement. By the time your precious council decides to hold committee meetings and file reports, these colonists will be working in our mining operations or feeding our livestock. The galaxy belongs to the strong, not to those who hide behind lawyers and bureaucrats. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Jake staring at a blank screen. He could hear Amy continuing to monitor the emergency frequencies, where desperate voices from the colony were reporting civilian casualties and requesting immediate assistance. The colonists had been defending themselves for 3 days against overwhelming odds, but their basic defensive systems were no match for military-grade Vorthic weapons. Sir, I'm receiving a priority message from the colony's settlement coordinator, Amy reported. A man named Ben Harper is requesting emergency evacuation assistance for non-combatants, especially the children in the settlement's school complex. Jake made a decision that would have consequences far beyond anything he could imagine. Instead of following standard protocols and waiting for Earth to send diplomatic protests through official channels, he activated a communication system that had been installed on every human ship but never used in over a century. The system connected directly to Earth's military command, using encryption codes that predated humanity's membership in the Galactic Council. Priority Alpha transmission to Admiral Helen Carter, Earth Defense Command. Jake spoke into the secure communicator. Request immediate guidance on Outer Rim crisis involving civilian casualties and Galactic Council law violations. The response came back within minutes, using the same ancient military codes. Admiral Carter's message was brief, but carried implications that Jake was only beginning to understand. Document everything, Captain Morrison. Record all communications, civilian casualties, and Council responses to your diplomatic protests. The act won't hold much longer, and when it falls, we'll need evidence of what pushed us over the edge. The news from Kepler system reached Earth within 48 hours, and President Claire Thompson found herself staring at reports that made her blood run cold. The Serenity's Hope colony had fallen after 5 days of fighting, with over 400 civilian casualties, including 63 children who had been trapped in the settlement school when Vorthic ground forces overran the defensive perimeter. The survivors had been loaded onto slave ships and transported to mining worlds. Deep in Vorthic territory, President Thompson sat in the secure briefing room beneath the White House, surrounded by advisors who had been waiting for this moment. For decades, General Rick Hayes spread classified files across the conference table, documents that detailed humanity's true capabilities hidden since their admission to the Galactic Council 2 centuries earlier. Admiral George Mason activated a holographic display showing star charts marked with symbols that told a very different story about human expansion into space. Madam President, we have confirmation of 3 more attacks in the past 2 weeks. General Hayes reported with barely controlled anger in his voice. New Bristol colony was hit 6 days ago, followed by attacks on Haven's Rest and Port Liberty. The Vorthok are not just raiding anymore. They're conducting systematic conquest operations against human settlements. Dr. Frank Miller, Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, had returned from Nexus Prime with news that was even worse than the military reports. The Council's response to human requests for protection had been dismissive at best, with most member species viewing the attacks as minor border disputes that would resolve themselves through natural selection. Speaker Veltar of the Ashanti had actually used those exact words during the emergency session. The Council sees our restraint as proof that we're not worth protecting, Dr. Miller explained to the assembled group. They believe that any species unable to defend itself deserves whatever fate befalls it. Some members are even suggesting that humanity should consider relocating to less desirable systems to avoid future conflicts with more aggressive neighbors. President Thompson had spent her entire political career maintaining the careful diplomatic balance that kept Earth in good standing with the galactic community. She had attended countless meetings where human representatives smiled politely, while alien species made jokes about human weakness and naivety. The act had served humanity well, allowing them to expand across hundreds of worlds while their neighbors dismissed them as harmless farmers and merchants. Admiral Mason cleared his throat and activated another display that showed the real scope of human military preparation. Madam President, our deep space monitoring stations have been tracking Vorthok fleet movements for the past month. They're not just targeting isolated colonies anymore. Intelligence suggests they're planning a major offensive against the core human worlds, including Earth itself. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. The Vorthok had apparently decided that humans were so weak that they could be conquered entirely, without significant resistance from other council members. They had studied 2 centuries of human diplomatic responses and concluded that Earth would surrender rather than fight a real war. President Thompson turned to Dr. Alina Vasquez, Earth's leading expert on alien psychology and the architect of HFY, humanity's long-term deception strategy. Alina, give me your professional assessment. How do the other species really see us? Dr. Vasquez had spent decades studying alien cultures and had helped design the behavioral patterns that kept humanity appearing harmless to their galactic neighbors. Her research had shown that most alien species thought in very simple terms about predator and prey relationships, unable to conceive of a predator that could successfully pretend to be prey for extended periods. They see us as successful herbivores. Dr. Vasquez explained calmly, clever enough to build ships and join their club, but fundamentally weak creatures who avoid conflict because we cannot win fights. The Vorthok have convinced themselves that humans will submit to slavery rather than risk casualties in a real war. They literally cannot imagine that we might be hiding our true nature. General Hayes opened another classified file and spread photographs across the table. The images showed human military installations that officially did not exist, hidden on asteroids and moons throughout human space. Weapons factories on Mars had been producing advanced combat equipment for decades, disguised as mining operations and research facilities. The Jupiter shipyards had been building warships that were registered in Council databases as cargo haulers and passenger transports. Our military strength has grown every year for 2 centuries, General Hayes reported. We now have more combat vessels than the next 5 Council species combined, but they're all disguised as civilian craft. Our weapons technology is at least 50 years ahead of anything the Vorthek possess, but we've been very careful to keep that information classified. President Thompson knew that the decision she was about to make would change everything. For 200 years, humanity had built their galactic reputation on being reasonable, peaceful, and willing to compromise rather than fight. Earth's children learned in school about the importance of diplomacy and cooperation with alien neighbors. Human entertainment celebrated the values of understanding and communication over violence and conquest. The secure communicator on the Homes table chimed with an incoming priority message from the Outer Rim. Admiral Helen Carter's voice filled the room with news that would push humanity past the point of no return. Madam President, we have confirmed reports of a new attack on New Geneva Colony. The Vorthek are broadcasting their assault live on galactic networks as a demonstration of human weakness. President Thompson activated the main display to receive the transmission from New Geneva. What she saw made her hands shake with rage that she had been suppressing for decades. Vorthek soldiers were executing human families in the colony's main square, while their commander provided running commentary about the futility of human resistance. She watched as children were separated from their parents and loaded onto transport ships bound for slave markets. They're making an example of us, Dr. Miller said quietly. A broadcast is being watched by every species in the Council. The Vorthek want to demonstrate that humans can be conquered without consequences, that our diplomatic protection is worthless when faced with real military force. The final image that broke President Thompson's resolve showed a group of human children being herded into slave pens, while Vorthek guards laughed at their tears. Among them she recognized the face of 8-year-old Cathy Santos, daughter of the colony's head teacher Maria Santos, whose desperate messages for help had been broadcast across human space for the past week. President Thompson stood up slowly and walked to the secure cabinet that had remained locked since her inauguration. Inside was a single folder marked with symbols that predated humanity's admission to the Galactic Council. The authorization codes inside would activate military systems that had been hidden for 2 centuries, waiting for the day when diplomacy finally failed. Gentlemen, ladies, President Thompson said as she opened the folder, I am hereby authorizing Operation Iron Mask. Send the activation codes to all fleet commanders and colonial defense networks. The galaxy is about to learn what humans are really capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized. Admiral Dan Foster received the sealed orders aboard the UES Retribution while his ship was stationed at what the Galactic Council believed to be a mining operation near the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The facility was actually one of humanity's most advanced military shipyards, where vessels like the Retribution had been constructed in secret over the past 50 years. When Admiral Foster broke the encryption on his orders and read the contents, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation that he had been waiting to experience his entire career. Retribution was not the exploration vessel that appeared in Council shipping records. Beneath its disguised hull lay weapon systems that could level entire planets and defensive shields that could withstand the combined firepower of most alien fleets. Admiral Foster had commanded similar vessels for 3 decades, always waiting for the day when humanity would finally reveal what they had been building, while the galaxy dismissed them as harmless merchants and farmers. Captain Sarah Kim received her orders aboard the destroyer Swift Justice, which was officially registered as a cargo transport carrying medical supplies to human colonies. In reality, her ship mounted particle beam weapons that could slice through alien battle cruisers like heated knives through soft butter. She had spent years practicing combat maneuvers disguised as navigation training, preparing for a war that most humans believed would never come. Captain Alex Chon commanded the carrier Valkyrie's Wing, a massive vessel that appeared in Council databases as a passenger liner designed to transport colonists to new worlds. The ship's cargo bays actually contained 300 fighter craft piloted by humans who had trained their entire lives for space combat while officially working as civilian transport pilots. Each fighter was equipped with technology that exceeded anything the Council species had ever developed. The target of their mission was New Harmony, a human world that had been under Vorthic siege for 2 weeks. Governor Pete Williams had managed to evacuate most of the civilian population to underground shelters carved deep into the planet's mountain ranges. But Vorthic ground forces were steadily advancing toward the last defensive positions. Defense. Coordinator Nancy Brooks had been sending increasingly desperate messages to Earth, reporting that her people could not hold out much longer without immediate military support. Admiral Foster's battle group jumped to faster-than-light travel using engines that officially did not exist. The journey to New Harmony took only 6 hours instead of the 3 days that Council navigation charts indicated should be required. When they dropped back into normal space at the edge of the New Harmony system, they found exactly what intelligence reports had predicted. A Vorthic invasion, fleet consisting of 24 heavy cruisers and over 100 smaller attack vessels. Commander Krelvoth of the Vorthic Third Fleet was supervising the final phases of the planetary conquest when his sensors detected the incoming human ships. He had studied the official specifications of human vessels and knew that even 3 ships would pose no threat to his overwhelming numerical advantage. The Human Exploration Service was known throughout the galaxy for building slow, lightly armed vessels designed for peaceful scientific research rather than military operations. 3 human ships approaching from the outer system, reported Krelvoth's sensor operator. Configuration matches standard exploration vessels with basic defensive capabilities only. Estimated combat effectiveness is negligible compared to our current force strength. Krelvoth had participated in attacks on 17 human colonies over the past year and had never encountered serious resistance from Earth's military forces. Human settlements always seemed to have minimal defenses, and their ships consistently fled rather than engage in combat. He had concluded that humans were simply too weak and cowardly to pose any real threat to the Vorthic Empire's expansion plans. Admiral Foster opened communication channels on all frequencies used by both human and alien vessels. His message was broadcast simultaneously to the Vorthic fleet, the human defenders on New Harmony's surface, and monitoring stations throughout the surrounding star systems. The words he spoke had been rehearsed by human military commanders for decades, waiting for the moment when diplomatic solutions would finally be abandoned. "This is Admiral Foster of the Human Defense Fleet," he announced in a voice that carried 2 centuries of suppressed anger. "All Vorthic vessels will withdraw from New Harmony space immediately or be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to begin your retreat. This is your only warning." Commander Krelvoth laughed so hard that his communications officer had to adjust the audio filters to prevent feedback. The idea that 3 human exploration ships could threaten his entire invasion fleet struck him as the most amusing thing he had heard in years. He had captured and interrogated hundreds of human prisoners during recent raids, and they had all demonstrated the same pathetic weakness that seemed to characterize their entire species. "Human Admiral, your threats are as empty as your species' courage," Krelvoth replied with obvious contempt. "Return to whatever pathetic world spawned you before we decide to add your ships to our trophy collection. The Vorthic Empire does not negotiate with prey animals who pretend to be predators." Admiral Foster checked his chronometer and noted that exactly 30 seconds had elapsed since his warning. Throughout the battle group, weapon systems that had been hidden for 2 centuries came online, with a deep humming sound that vibrated through every hull plate. The Retribution's main guns emerged from concealed ports, while the Swift Justice's particle beam arrays unfolded like the petals of some deadly mechanical flower. The Valkyrie's wing launched its fighter squadrons, 300 small craft that moved with speed and precision that defied everything the Vorthik knew about human technology. Fire. Admiral Foster commanded simply. What happened next would be discussed in military academies throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The human weapons unleashed destruction on a scale that no council species had ever witnessed in. Actual combat. The Retribution's main plasma cannons punched through Vorthik shield systems as if they were made of paper, each shot completely vaporizing enemy cruisers that had been considered the pinnacle of military engineering. The Swift Justice's particle beams sliced through the hulls of multiple vessels with single continuous blasts, cutting entire ships in half with surgical precision. The human fighters swarmed through the Vorthik formation like angry insects. There, weapon systems targeting enemy vessels with accuracy that seemed impossible given their small size. Each fighter pilot had trained for this moment since childhood, practicing combat maneuvers that their alien neighbors believed were simply advanced navigation exercises. They moved in perfect coordination, striking with overwhelming force before, disappearing into the void to attack from completely different angles. Commander Krelvoth watched in horror as his invasion fleet was systematically annihilated by weapons that should not have existed. His flagship's shields collapsed under sustained plasma bombardment while human fighters destroyed his escort vessels with casual efficiency. The entire battle lasted exactly 18 minutes, and when it ended, not a single Vorthik vessel remained, intact enough to pose any threat to New Harmony or its defenders. The 3 human ships had not suffered so much as a scratch on their hulls. Admiral Foster opened communications with Governor Williams on the planet's surface to inform him that New Harmony was secure and that relief supplies would arrive within hours. Then he sent a message to Earth that consisted of only 3 words: mission accomplished successfully. The news of the New Harmony battle reached every corner of the galaxy within 6 hours, transmitted by automated monitoring stations that recorded all military activities in council space. Species that had known humans as peaceful diplomats and harmless traders suddenly found themselves staring at combat footage that challenged everything they believed about galactic power structures. The recording showed human warships that moved with impossible speed and carried weapons that exceeded the theoretical limits of known technology. On the council homeworld of Nexus Prime, Speaker Valtar called an emergency session that drew representatives from over 400 member species. The Great Assembly Hall had never been so crowded, with alien diplomats filling every available seat and many more standing in the aisles. The atmosphere was tense with fear and confusion as species that had dismissed humans for 2 centuries tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Dr. Frank Miller entered the assembly hall through doors that parted like curtains before him. The human ambassador walked slowly to the speaker's platform, while hundreds of alien eyes tracked his every movement. Many of the representatives had attended social gatherings with Dr. Miller over the years, sharing drinks and making jokes about human naivety and weakness. Now they looked at him as if seeing a completely different creature wearing familiar clothing. Honored delegates, Speaker Veltar began with a voice that trembled slightly. We have called this emergency session to address the unprecedented military action taken by human forces against Vorthik vessels in the New Harmony system. Ambassador Miller, the Council demands an immediate explanation for this violation of our long-standing peace treaties. Dr. Miller stood at the podium with the same calm expression he had worn during decades of diplomatic meetings. He had spent his entire career listening to alien species make condescending remarks about human weakness, while secretly knowing that his people possessed military capabilities that could conquer the entire galaxy. The act had required tremendous self-control, but it had served its purpose perfectly. Honored Speaker, distinguished delegates, Dr. Miller replied in the measured tones that had made him famous as a diplomatic negotiator. Humanity has not violated any peace treaties. We have simply exercised our right to defend our citizens when the Council's protection mechanisms proved inadequate for that purpose. The Zephyrian delegate, a tall creature with crystalline features who had often mocked human military capabilities during trade negotiations, rose to address the assembly. Ambassador Miller, the vessels your species deployed at New Harmony do not match any specifications in Council military databases. Where did these weapons come from, and why were their capabilities concealed from this body? Dr. Miller's response sent a chill through the assembly hall that seemed to lower the temperature by several degrees. Delegate HFY, humanity never submitted complete military specifications to the Council because we were never required to do so. We provided information about our exploration and trade vessels as mandated by membership agreements, but our defensive capabilities were always classified as internal security matters. The implications of this statement struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. For 2 centuries, every Council species had assumed that the peaceful human vessels they encountered represented the full extent of Earth's technological capabilities. The revelation that humans had been hiding advanced military systems while participating in Council activities suggested a level of deception that most alien minds found difficult to comprehend. Speaker Veltar struggled to maintain his composure as he addressed the human ambassador. Dr. Miller, are you suggesting that your species has been deliberately concealing military assets while presenting yourselves as a peaceful exploration culture? This would represent a fundamental violation of the trust that underlies our galactic community. Dr. Miller's smile contained no warmth as he responded to the accusation. Speaker Veltar, humanity has been exactly what we appeared to be, a peaceful species that prefers diplomatic solutions to military conflicts. However, we never claimed to be defenseless, and we never agreed to remain defenseless in the face of unprovoked aggression against our civilian populations. The Ashanti delegate, whose species had often dismissed human concerns during previous Council sessions, demanded additional information about Earth's military capabilities. Ambassador Miller, how many vessels like those deployed at New Harmony does your species possess, and what are their operational parameters? The human ambassador's response would be quoted in history books for centuries to come. Delegate Ashkara, that information is classified under Earth's national security provisions. However, I can tell you that the 3 ships at New Harmony represent a very small fraction of humanity's defensive capabilities, and that we have the ability to protect every human world simultaneously if required. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Paul Kim was releasing classified documents from the Human Historical Archives that revealed the true scope of humanity's expansion into space. The files showed that every human colony, trade station, and diplomatic outpost had been strategically positioned to create an interlocking network of military strongholds spanning nearly half the galaxy. What other species had viewed as random exploration and settlement patterns was actually a carefully planned conquest operation that had taken 2 centuries to complete. Captain Jake Morrison received new orders aboard the UES Horizon while his ship was still stationed near the former Vorthik positions at Kepler system. His peaceful exploration vessel was being recalled to a facility that officially did not exist, where it would be retrofitted with weapon systems that had been stored in secret for decades. Engineer Lucy Barnes supervised the installation of plasma cannons and particle shields that transformed their scientific research ship into a battleship capable of destroying entire enemy fleets. The process was being repeated throughout human space as thousands of vessels shed their civilian disguises and revealed their true military purposes. Cargo haulers emerged from hidden bays carrying fighter squadrons. Passenger liners deployed weapons that could crack planetary surfaces, and mining ships activated defensive systems that surpassed anything in the Council's technology databases. Zephyrian Empire, which had been humanity's primary rival in trade negotiations for over 50 years, began emergency evacuations of their border colonies after intelligence reports confirmed that human merchant vessels had been conducting detailed scans of their defensive installations for decades. The same ships that had delivered trade goods and cultural exchanges had apparently been mapping every military asset and strategic weakness in Zephyrian space. Other species throughout the galaxy began reviewing their interactions with humans over the past 2 centuries, searching for clues they had missed about Earth's true intentions. The pattern that emerged was terrifying in its implications. Humanity had not been exploring space randomly or establishing colonies based on available resources. Every human settlement, every trade agreement, and every diplomatic relationship had been part of a master plan that positioned Earth as the dominant power in the galaxy, while their neighbors remained completely oblivious to what was happening. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared on galactic news networks to provide her analysis of the situation for species that were struggling to understand how they had been so completely deceived. Her explanation was simple and chilling. Humans are apex predators who spent 2 centuries convincing everyone else that we were harmless herbivores. We studied your psychology, learned your weaknesses, and positioned ourselves to control the galaxy while you dismissed us as too weak to be a threat. The deception worked perfectly because you never imagined that a truly dangerous species would choose to appear harmless for strategic purposes. 6 months after the Battle of New Harmony, the galaxy had transformed into something completely different from what it had been for the previous 2 centuries. The Vorthic Empire no longer existed as a political entity after Admiral Helen Carter's Second Fleet conducted what she officially termed population restructuring operations throughout their former territory. The species that had once terrorized human colonies now lived in designated settlements under direct human supervision, their military capabilities permanently dismantled, and their aggressive leadership replaced with individuals who understood. The new reality. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U-East Pathfinder, which had once been the exploration vessel Horizon before its complete military retrofit. His ship now carried enough firepower to level entire cities, and his crew included specialists in what humans euphemistically called diplomatic negotiations with resistant alien populations. The Pathfinder was conducting a tour of systems that had previously dismissed human concerns, delivering messages that were simple and direct in their content. The latest stop on Morrison's diplomatic mission was the Corvan system, where the local government had spent decades making jokes about human weakness during trade negotiations. Prime Minister Keth Volume had been particularly fond of referring to humans as useful pets who could be trained to perform complex tasks but lacked the intelligence for real leadership. Morrison's current mission was to help the Corvan leadership understand how dramatically their situation had changed. Prime Minister Keth Volume, Morrison began as his image appeared on screens throughout the Corvan capital. I am Captain Morrison, representing the new Galactic Administration. We are here to discuss your government's future relationship with the Terran hegemony and to clarify certain misconceptions about human capabilities that may have influenced your previous policy decisions. The Corvan leader had initially planned to respond with the same condescending attitude he had always used when dealing with human representatives. However, the sight of Morrison's heavily armed battle group orbiting his homeworld made such responses seem inadvisable. Intelligence reports from across the galaxy had made it clear that species who chose to maintain hostile attitudes toward humanity tended to experience unfortunate accidents that left their worlds uninhabitable. Captain Morrison, Prime Minister. Keth Volume replied with careful politeness. The Corvan government wishes to express our desire for continued peaceful relations with your species and our willingness to discuss any concerns you may have about our previous interactions. Morrison's smile held the same predatory quality that human diplomats were displaying throughout the galaxy as they renegotiated relationships that had been based on false assumptions about Earth's power. Prime Minister We appreciate your cooperative attitude. However, we need to address some statements you made during last year's trade conference, particularly your comments about humans being suitable for manual labor positions in Corvin industrial facilities. The silence that followed Morrison's words was broken only by the sound of Corvin officials shuffling nervously in their seats. Everyone in the room remembered the trade conference where their leader had suggested that humans would make excellent workers in Corvin factories because of their supposed docility and willingness to follow orders without question. The comment had been intended as a joke, but it no longer seemed amusing given current circumstances. On Earth, President Claire Thompson was reviewing reports from similar diplomatic missions throughout human space. The pattern was consistent. Across hundreds of worlds, alien species that had dismissed humanity for 2 centuries were now desperately trying to avoid the fate that had befallen more openly hostile neighbors. The transformation from peaceful diplomacy to benevolent conquest had proceeded exactly as human strategists had predicted it would when the time came to reveal their true nature. Admiral George Mason presented the latest intelligence summary to President Thompson's War Council, which had replaced the civilian advisory groups that had guided human policy during the diplomatic era. Madam President, we have confirmed that the last independent military forces in this sector have either surrendered or been neutralized. The hegemony now controls star systems containing approximately 70% of the galaxy's habitable worlds. The speed of humanity's conquest had surprised even their own military planners. Once alien species realized the true extent of human military capabilities, most had chosen immediate surrender rather than risk the complete destruction. That had befallen those who attempted resistance. The careful positioning of human colonies and trade stations over 2 centuries had created a network of strategic strongholds that made effective opposition virtually impossible. Dr. Elena Vasquez continued her research into alien psychology, but her focus had shifted from maintaining deception to understanding how conquered species could be integrated into the new galactic order. Her latest reports suggested that most aliens were adapting to human rule with remarkable speed, apparently finding relief in having their decisions made by obviously superior beings, rather than struggling with the complexities of independent governance. The psychological profiles indicate that many species are actually more comfortable under human authority than they were during the Council era. Dr. Vasquez explained to President Thompson during their weekly briefing. They spent centuries worrying about making wrong decisions that might lead to conflict or economic disaster. Now they can focus on following human directives and contributing to a stable galactic civilization. Captain Morrison completed his diplomatic mission to the Corvin system with results that had become typical throughout human space. Prime Minister Keth Volume formally requested admission to the Terran hegemony and agreed to implement human administrative oversight for all major governmental decisions. The Corvin military was disbanded and replaced with human security forces, while their economic system was restructured to support the broader goals of galactic civilization under Earth's guidance. Admiral Dan Foster stood on the bridge of the UES Nemesis, which had become the flagship of humanity's galactic fleet after the dissolution of the old exploration service. His ship was conducting routine patrols through systems that had once been independent alien territories, but were now classified as Terran administrative zones. The transition had been remarkably smooth, with most populations adapting to their new circumstances without significant resistance. Commander Webb, Admiral Foster addressed his first officer as they observed a former alien military base being converted into a human training facility. Do you think we went too far in our response to the Vorthic attacks? Commander Lisa Webb had served under Foster since the early days of the hidden military buildup, and she understood the moral complexities of humanity's transformation from apparent prey to obvious predator. Sir, they had 200 years to learn that our patience had limits. Every human diplomat who smiled politely while being insulted, every trade negotiation where we accepted unfair terms, every request for help that was ignored by the Council. They chose not to listen to the warnings. Admiral Foster nodded as he watched human children playing in parks that had been built on worlds that were alien territories. Just months earlier, the former inhabitants of these worlds now worked in human-supervised facilities, contributing to galactic civilization, while their own aggressive instincts were carefully managed through behavioral modification programs developed by Dr. Vasquez's research teams. The galaxy spent 2 centuries learning to see us as harmless merchants and explorers, Admiral Foster observed as his ship continued its patrol route. Now they'll spend the next 2 centuries learning what happens when apex predators decide to stop pretending they're herbivores. The game was always about patience, and we played it better than they could have imagined. In the end, the whispered warnings that had begun spreading through alien populations after New Harmony had proven completely accurate. Humanity had never been the gentle diplomats that other species believed them to be. They had been apex predators, playing a strategic game that their neighbors didn't even realize existed. And now that the game was over, the galaxy belonged to those who had been patient enough to win it properly.